Welcome back to Super Koopa TV, and today I want to talk a little bit about what happened to Nickelodeon. Now, of course, Nickelodeon is still around. Nothing actually happened to it, as it were, but it has faced significant decline with bad decision after bad decision. And I think what we need to do is we need to go back and try and figure out where the network started and where it is now. So, it officially launched in April of 1979 as an experimental. At first, it was an experimental cable network, a part of QUBE, a local cable network in Ohio, and it had one show called Pinwheel, which was a children's television network. And then it went national in '79, and they had a whole bunch of other programming. And then, in around, I want to say 1984, would it be 1984? Yeah, roughly 1984, 1985. They had a logo that was a silver ball. It's kind of like a pinball, and it had like a rainbow thing. I'll throw it up on the screen. But they went from that in 1985 to the orange shape-shifting logo, which we know as the Splat. The most iconic version of it is the Splat. But the idea was that the logo could be quite literally anything. It was just the balloon font Nickelodeon on an orange background. And the bumper campaign for that for the next 20 some odd years would be insane. Absolutely nuts. And it was incredibly effective. It worked incredibly well. It's really, really special. And then in 1991, they introduced the concept of Nicktoons. And they had three. They had Doug, Ren and Stimpy, and Rugrats. And this exploded the network. So from 1991 on, Nickelodeon became what we know it today. And then in 1990, just a little before that, they launched Nickelodeon Studios, which was one of the coolest things they ever did. They made a full-scale production facility in Universal Studios, Florida, where people could go see the attractions, but they also were able to film live-action shows on 2 sound stages. They had all sorts of game shows and sitcoms, and they didn't have to rent facilities anymore. But also, there was a lot of audience participation in these. So it was an event for people to go to. And it was wildly successful for at least 15 years, until it closed in 2005. So as the 90s go on, they start picking up more Nicktoons. You get more iconic stuff like Rocko's Modern Life, Angry Beavers, Ah Real Monsters, Hey Arnold. A lot of stuff starts in the mid to late 90s. Then in the 2000s, by 1999, the most iconic Nicktoon currently that is still running, SpongeBob SquarePants, is launched. And then from then on, it's just a cavalcade of more and more original Nicktoons. Some from Klasky Csupo, some from more independent producers. They had a really good relationship with Klasky Csupo. So everything's going great. Throughout the 90s, everything was pretty much a smash hit, and if it wasn't, it just quietly disappeared. But they were experimenting, they were doing great. They had the iconography, they had the programming. It was in more households, and it was increasing as cable became more popular. It was going very great. Then, momentum started to slow around, I want to say 2005, 2006. 2005 was when they officially closed Nickelodeon Studios. They didn't close productions, obviously. They just moved productions from what was in Orlando for live action, and they sort of, I think they went back to Los Angeles for most of it. They went to Nick on Sunset. And then that ended up closing, and then they just went back, I think, to renting out different facilities to produce their stuff. They don't have their own facilities for live action, it seems, anymore. Unless I'm mistaken there. But they do have their own facilities for animation. They've continued to build up that animation studio in Burbank. That Burbank studio was made in, I believe, 1997. I could be wrong on the exact date. But, they produced so many shows, so many cartoons, so many live-action series, so many game shows. They were doing what no other network was doing. Disney couldn't keep up. Cartoon Network couldn't keep up. And at both times, both of those competing networks tried to mimic Nickelodeon. They were that successful. But they never were able to quite find the formula. You know, at one point, Disney tried to do a ripoff of All That called Sunny with a Chance, which eventually became So Random, which was supposed to be like a sketch variety show for kids, but you can't beat All That, and they actually brought All That back. I don't know how it's done, or if it's continued to be successful, but Now we're starting to get into when Nickelodeon loses its momentum. And if I had to put a pinpoint as to when that was, it would have been in around 2008, 2009. Around that time, suddenly, without warning, people were watching, I think maybe Drake and Josh was on. I don't remember what. And then suddenly the iconic logo shifted from the iconic splat in balloon font to this abomination. Yeah. And the reasoning behind this was Nickelodeon at this point had, I think, 3 or 4 sister networks. They had Nicktoons, they had Teen Nick, and they had Nick at Night, which was just Nickelodeon past its broadcast. It was their Adult Swim, basically, but it was, funnily enough, more family-oriented still. And they had, I believe, Noggin. I don't think Noggin became its own network until later on. But at this point, they had 3 or 4 spin-off networks that were in the Nickelodeon family under Paramount/Viacom. And they wanted them to be uniformed. They wanted them to all be identifiable. And so they went with the abomination I just showed you. So the splat was gone, and all variations of the splat were gone. And fans took notice. They did. They absolutely did not like what Nickelodeon had done, and they complained about it. They didn't like it. And this is in a social media era. This is 2009. So social media is still, it's ramping up to the degree that we know it today. And they didn't like it, but Nickelodeon didn't budge. They wanted to keep this branding. And what Nickelodeon and what other companies, they didn't learn from Coke. When you've got something that isn't broken, you don't go out of your way to try and fix it. What Coca-Cola did, I believe in the 1980s with Coca-Cola, is they were losing to Pepsi badly. Pepsi had all the marketing campaigns. They were branded as the choice of a new generation. Coke was considered your grandpa's soda, which, why would you disrespect your grandparents? I mean, seriously, unless they were terrible. I don't understand why they would go with that. So Coca-Cola decided, given all that pressure, that they would rebrand it into essentially a new formula that was, I think, more similar to Pepsi. And it was awful, and it failed miserably. They got angry letters. The CEO of Coke at the time got a call from a woman who was sobbing. She said, "I couldn't believe you guys did this." It was a mess. It was an absolute mess. And Nickelodeon themselves, they decided that they were going to make a similar mistake and redo the font and completely get rid of the whole splat thing. They sort of alluded to, like, still a slimy splat identity. They kept the slime. If they got rid of the slime, they would have gotten those angry letters. But they kept sort of the messy type of imagery. But the theme song was trivialized, and the imagery was not what it used to be. It didn't feel as kid-generated. Like, you had kids in bumpers, but it didn't feel like kids actually made it. So it wasn't as special as during the Splat era. A lot of the bumpers felt like kids had actually made it, and that they were iconic. Many of them were very complicated, and some of them were very expensive. You have stuff like Pinch Face. I forget what some of the other ones are called, but I did a whole video going over the bumpers. That should either be up or it will be up at some point. If not on YouTube, it will be on... Most certainly, it will be on Rumble and or Odyssey, so keep an eye open for that. But it was iconic. They completely killed their own iconography for no other reason than, well, we think the consumer might get confused, which they weren't. I look back, even the Nick at Night logo they had was awesome. But, I mean, geez, it was... At first you think, okay, well, it's a logo change, no big deal. What matters is the programming, right? You know, the programming is the most important thing on the network. Well, the programming started to decline. What ended up happening was SpongeBob was so ridiculously successful as a Nicktoon that they started airing it and more of its seasons in entire blocks. There was basically SpongeBob marathons every day. And then the live-action stuff started taking a back seat. Then you had all the controversy with Dan Schneider, who pretty much was responsible for the most successful live-action stuff at Nickelodeon. And they never really found a replacement. So the live-action stuff started to decline and started to just get weird and gimmicky. And as far as Nicktoons were concerned, if it wasn't franchisable or an established franchise, they wouldn't take it. To this day, legacy creators are asked, why don't you create something new for this network? And they say, well, they don't want anything new from us. They just want stuff they know will succeed. It is such a stupid mentality in Hollywood and in entertainment right now that everything has to be franchisable, and it's failing multiple times, because what people want is original stuff that has a feel of what the stuff that came before it had, that has a familiarity to it. If something doesn't have a familiarity to it in terms of its style of humor and animation, then people won't go for it. If it's just wacky and quote-unquote modern, then it won't be good. You know, I point to Rocko's Modern Life, the original series. I don't much care for the movie. I really don't like to talk about the movie because I didn't like it. But the reason it worked was because the title was very ironic, because it was of the time. I mean, you still saw stuff like VHS, and comic book shops were big. Comic book shops still exist, but comics are in the toilet. But you had certain references to the 90s, but it wasn't built on that. It was built solidly on its characterization and storytelling. So it could have taken place in literally any era. Any era, so long as that era had VHS and comic books. But its strength was its characters and its storytelling. Being modern was just sort of a consequence. It was just a part of the title. It wasn't anything that was important. It was a timeless show that is still watched and beloved today. Many of their Nicktoons from the 90s are iconic. People still love Nickelodeon's run of Doug. Even though it was only, 4 seasons? 5 seasons? It was iconic. It established itself. There had been nothing like that before, and very little like it since. And so Nickelodeon is doing they're doing things very strangely. They're playing it safe. They're not really producing a lot of new content. They, instead of doing game shows, what they've done is they've substituted that with sports, with their own sort of overlay on it, where they put graphics over this, like they do the NFL, and they have kid commentators and they do graphics over. Kids don't care about the NFL. A lot of kids don't care about the NFL, I should say. I didn't care about the NFL growing up, except for my mom would go crazy during football games. You know? Because she was really passionate about our team. But trying to do that, and I assume that has something to do with CBS's contract with the NFL. They're trying to work something in so that they can get more interest, drum up more interest in the NFL than there already is. And I don't think it's working. Because they did the, what was it, the Slime Bowl or whatever. They had Patrick Starr and some other commentators. And didn't work. As far as I know, it really was not successful. I don't think it pulled in the ratings. What they need to do is go back to game shows. Now, I know they tried to reboot Double Dare, and it only lasted a year. And again, it's because they're like, well, we can just go back and do this thing. The problem is Nickelodeon Studios is gone. Nickelodeon Studios helped drum up that hype because it was something that people could strive to go to, but they completely killed it. So without Nickelodeon Studios, you really can't have game shows unless you build your own facility and you market it. And you make it to be like, hey, this is something that you can come to. You can come to a live taping of this. You know, you can write in to participate, or you can email us, or they used to write in back in the day, but I guess today they would email Paramount or Nickelodeon or whoever is involved with the casting and production. They would email them to be a contestant. They would audition. You can't do that anymore. I mean, you can, obviously, but it's not the same as when it was Nickelodeon Studios. Now you have to go to some weird soundstage out in the middle of nowhere, and it's not the same. It's just not the same. I'm not saying that's exactly what you have to do. Calm down. I'm just saying it doesn't have their brand flavor. What they've done effectively is they've damaged the Nickelodeon brand. Partially by a logo change, but also by a philosophy in what they're producing for media. They've damaged their long-running brand. And they're trying to find it back again. They brought back the splat in a more modern context. They took the logo and they brought the color scheme back, and they brought the sort of slimy look back, sort of. They didn't want to commit to going fully back to what they were, and I think the reason is, and I'm sure they considered it. I'm sure they did. Because when you're making a business decision like that, I guarantee you somebody said, why don't we just go back to what it was entirely? But I guarantee you the reason they didn't was because they did not feel confident enough that they would be able to bring back what they had. I guarantee you that was one of the reasons why they went with this sort of hybrid logo design. I guarantee that. Because a lot of people are looking at this and they're saying, okay, so are they going to commit to more original programming that's varied and fun and really great bumper campaigns and all of this? I don't think so. I think they're just trying to remind people of what they were in hopes that that will draw them back. But the reality is, they're the Paw Patrol network, they're the SpongeBob network, they're the Loud House network, really Loud House. Oh, I hate the Loud House. I can't stand that stuff, but I won't harp on that. They're just a generic kids network now, and they're still the leader somehow, but they're very generic. They're very generic, and that's not a formula that they're alone in. Cartoon Network and Disney subsequently have done the exact same thing with their programming because of one reason, and that is streaming. Everything is being pushed to streaming. Instead of simulcasting things, they're pushing direct to streaming. Direct to stream programming is a mistake. I truly believe it's a mistake because there is still a market for network television. Even if it's not cable or satellite, there's still Sling TV, Philo TV, YouTube TV, Hulu with live TV that get networks like Nickelodeon, Disney, and Cartoon Network. So there's still people watching these networks or trying to watch these networks. And there's nothing for those kids to watch or those families to watch because these are largely family networks. And so by pushing everything to streaming, they're just destroying their network. Effectively, it's what they're doing. There's no reason for their network to even really exist the way that it's done. It's very, I don't want to say it's sad, but it's very confusing because a Joe Schmo like myself could very easily tell you, here's what you need to do to gain interest in a network again. I've done it with ABC. I don't think I've done it with any other network other than ABC and my suggestions for ABC. But it's very easy for me to look at a blueprint, look at what they had versus what they have now, and see what they need to adjust. Here is what I think needs to happen to Nickelodeon. Now, this video is titled What Happened. So basically what happened was they killed their brand. They effectively killed their brand. They killed the momentum. They made everything stale. They over-relied on the things that they saw got the most viewership, and they haven't been willing to expand and experiment and try more things that are familiar to people. They're not as adventurous of a network as they once were. So here's what I think they need to do. Number one, they've already changed the branding, so they're not going to change it again, unfortunately. You know, they're going to try to, I think what they're trying to do is weave it back into what it used to be. And that's fine. The logo, the new logo doesn't look terrible. It does remind you of times past. It does. But they need a very solid bumper campaign. They need to go back to doing what they did with those old bumpers. They need to look at all of them and say, where can we find people who can make bumpers like these for us now? Okay? That might not seem like a big deal to you, but it is part of building a brand and rebuilding a fallen brand. And that's exactly what they need to do. So they need to rebuild the brand of Nickelodeon. And this is a start. I don't want to dog this logo just because it's not exactly like what it was, okay? I do want to say it is a step in the right direction, and it is a step in rebuilding an iconography, especially for a whole new generation. But the second step is they absolutely need to be adventurous with Nicktoons again. They need to start producing original Nicktoons. One of the biggest problems the network has had is they've gone and they've acquired a whole bunch of already established franchises. They got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they got Transformers, and they got Garfield. I don't know what else they got. They also got the Smurfs. They need to go back to original programming. They need to do it, because if they rely on established franchises, they're just going to weaken them. Transformers the designs look terrible. Show kids today's Transformers designs from whatever show it is, something Earthspark or I don't know. Show them those designs versus the designs from something like Armada or the 80s cartoon. They'll go, wow, these were cool. The designs today are terrible. The shows are terrible. They just don't work. Same with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Every once in a while, they'll do a Ninja Turtles that's good. The first one they did under Nickelodeon was pretty good from what I understand. But subsequent ones haven't been. They really haven't been. And I know that's a matter of opinion, but it's the momentum isn't there. It just isn't. And that's because these are already established things with preconceived expectations. And they've taken them and they've done the Disney formula where we're just going to acquire as much as we can to build up our network. That's not what Nickelodeon is. Nickelodeon has been a network that produces its original things. They take people's ideas, they develop them, and they make them great. They need to do that again. If they don't do that, then they will stagnate and continue to stagnate as a network and just completely die off. So they need to stop just focusing on acquired franchises. I love Garfield. I love Ninja Turtles. I love Transformers. But those franchises are being modernized and reworked for modern audiences, and that just doesn't work. They are what they are, and they work because of what they are. You can't change them. You can't modify them. Another thing, get out of the politics. I know they have Nicktoons. They've always had Nicktoons, but they need to get out of the political sphere. They're way too in deep into the left-leaning politics of things. It needs to stop. You are a family, primarily kids network. You cannot rely on pushing political messages from one side of the aisle to kids and expect to be successful. Kids don't care. Look at the old Nickelodeon bumpers again. Look at today's bumpers. You've got all these wacky, zany, fun bumpers from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s, into the 2010s. Now, then what do you have once you get past the 2010s? Let's celebrate Women's History Month. That's a bumper in between shows. And it's usually the same ones over and over and over again. There's no variation. Stale, stagnant, uninteresting, boring to kids. They don't want to hear a history lesson. They're going to get that from school. Let them explore history on their own. Don't try to... The best thing that Nickelodeon did as far as politics was they did one time, I think, for President's Day, and they ran it subsequently, was they listed off the presidents up until the president of that time, which was George W. Bush. They did a song listing them off and posting fun and saying fun facts in the song about the presidents. That was neat. It wasn't controversial. It didn't draw up any sort of divisiveness or controversy. They were just stating historical fact. Just historical tidbits. That's it. That's all. Now it's, let's celebrate people of color. Let's celebrate women. Let's celebrate all of these different politically divisive things. Not that women are inherently politically divisive, but the way, let's celebrate feminism, basically, is a better way to put it. That the women's International Women's Day or International Women's Month, let's celebrate that in a feministic way, not in a genuinely inspiring way, not in a natural way. So they need to get away from all of that and go back to what made them them. Otherwise it just doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. So those are 3 things that they need to do. The last thing they need to do is regain consumer confidence by just not pushing everything to Paramount Plus and start simulcasting to the networks that actually exist. You've got Nicktoons, you've got Nickelodeon, you've got 2 Nickelodeon stations, you've got one that has the other time zone and vice versa. I think Nick 2 in the Pacific time zone is the one that's on the Eastern time zone. So if you want to go back in time and watch the programming, essentially, that's what you can do. It's kind of redundant. I don't know, but it is what it is. But you've got Teen Nick, you've got Nick at Night. Nick at Night is just Friends now, apparently. They just show endless episodes of Friends from what I can see from the schedule. Start making content for these things, for crying out loud. Because if you don't, your audience is just going to be like, well, why do I have a cable or internet TV or satellite subscription for this? This isn't worth subscribing for. This is ridiculous. I want new, original, fun content. That's the bottom line, is content is what draws people. Content, a good presentation, is what draws people. If you don't have that, the people won't come back. And that is what they destroyed. Nickelodeon destroyed itself in many ways, and it's having to rebuild itself. And if they don't do it right, then we won't have a network in a couple of years. Plain and simple. That your kids will not have what you had growing up. If I have kids, they won't have what I had growing up. And it's a crying shame to think about. but the ball is entirely in their court. Hopefully they listen to the feedback that people give them in regards to this, and not just them, multiple television networks. If we want to see any form of broadcast TV continue, the content needs to be there and it needs to be good. And it doesn't feel like they're a very good judge of content as it stands right now. So there might need to be some leadership shakeups, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyways, let me know what you think happened to Nickelodeon, what you think their future should be. I've already rambled on for long enough. Thank you very much for watching. This has been Super Koopa TV, and I will see you guys next time. God bless. Have a good one. Peace.